On a fog-covered hill in Louisville, Kentucky, there exists a place once hailed as a sanctuary for treating tuberculosis in the early 20th century. But over a century later, the Waverly Hills Sanatorium is no longer a place of healing. It is a place many believe that death itself has yet to depart from. This is not simply an abandoned building. It is a door left ajar between two worlds, and everyone who steps inside must confront something deep, persistent, and beyond description. Waverly Hills Sanatorium began as a humanitarian effort in the early 1910s, when tuberculosis, then known as the White Plague, was sweeping across America. With its U-shaped architecture and secluded location atop a tree-covered hill in Louisville, Kentucky, the place was envisioned as a haven of healing, where sunlight, fresh air, and hope would revive decaying lungs. But in truth, it was hell dressed in the robes of mercy. Waverly Hills was initially built to accommodate around 40 to 50 patients. But when the tuberculosis epidemic peaked in the 1920s and 1930s, that number surged into the hundreds. The hospital became overwhelmed, staff exhausted, and the death rate so high that up to 60 people were dying every day, a figure that former nurses later admitted they could never speak of again. Dead bodies quickly became just another cog in the hospital's daily routine. No funerals, no farewells, only gurneys quietly rolling down toward the body chute, a shadowy tunnel stretching over 150 meters to the base of the hill where horse-drawn wagons waited to carry the dead away in silence. That corridor wasn't just a route for corpses, it was a way to hide the truth from the living. Waverly did not allow visits easily. Patients were entirely cut off from the outside world. They never heard familiar voices, never felt the warmth of a loved one's hand. Some stayed there for years, seeing only ceilings, IV tubes, and hearing the rasping coughs of the dying. One patient once carved a message into a metal bed frame with their fingernails, "I'm still alive, but I'm no longer human." Rates of depression and mental breakdowns surged. Some patients jumped from balconies, bit off their tongues, or strangled themselves with IV tubing. And when a place holds both physical decay and psychological collapse, it ceases to be a hospital. It becomes a collective prison. Among the hundreds of rooms that once held thousands of lives, Room 502 is considered the darkest of them all. It isn't just a forgotten chamber. It is the cradle of secrets no one ever managed to explain. In 1928, a young nurse was found hanged inside Room 502. She died alone, no suicide note, no warning signs. Her death was hastily recorded in internal files. A tragic accident, a suicide, or a silent message. No one had an answer. A few years later, another nurse, this one pregnant, fell from the 5th floor balcony, her neck snapping on impact. There were no signs of struggle, yet no witnesses either. Stranger still, the identity of the child's father was never mentioned in any report. Rumors swirled that he was a high-ranking doctor, and the matter was quietly buried. Since then, Room 502 has been sealed off. But no matter how many locks are added, every night the door is always found slightly ajar, as if someone had just walked out. On the thick layer of dust covering the hallway floor, tiny footprints of a child appeared clearly, only to vanish right at the doorway. There was no way in, no way out, only the overwhelming sense that death itself was still whispering here, and someone, or something, had never left. Though it has long since been shut down, Waverly Hills continues to draw in ghost hunters, paranormal investigators, and filmmakers from all over. Infrared cameras set up in the 5th floor hallway have repeatedly captured tall, thin, human-shaped shadows standing still at the corridor's end, facing the wall. No eyes, no mouth, just a mute silhouette, as if punishing itself. In one instance, the shadow appeared in 2 separate frames, just seconds apart, but in a different spot, as if it had moved without motion. In that same area, a dim, flickering light, resembling a floating flame, was seen hovering close to the floor, then vanishing through a door that had been sealed shut for decades. What's strange is, there are no windows, and the existence of any light source at the scene was officially ruled out. A well-known ghost hunting team once abandoned their investigation in the middle of the night when a walkie-talkie, already powered off, suddenly broadcast a woman's voice calling one team member by name. 3 times it echoed, slower and raspier each time. The final moment before the signal cut was a harrowing noise, like heavy iron being dragged across concrete, reverberating as if from beneath the earth. Down in the body chute, the tunnel once used to discreetly remove thousands of corpses from the wards, an independent investigator was violently pulled down onto the freezing cement floor. He hadn't tripped on anything, but described the feeling of a cold hand gripping tightly around his ankle. When he turned on his flashlight, the entire space around him was empty, but the bruise that appeared on his skin bore the exact shape of 5 human fingers, stretching from his ankle down to the top of his foot. At that moment, the camera failed to capture anything, only a blinding white frame lasting 3 seconds. In the audio, there was only the sound of heavy, broken breathing, as if someone were gasping right in front of the lens, then silence. One of the most chilling incidents occurred in 2013. A documentary film crew, after leaving the hospital, reviewed their footage and discovered that in every single frame, there appeared a small, shadowy figure, legless, standing in distant corners near windows or at the end of hallways. When the footage was fast-forwarded, that shadow seemed to watch the crew, subtly shifting its position from one scene to another. There was absolutely no one else in the building with them. The entire shoot had been conducted under strict supervision. None of the crew ever returned to Waverly again. The only officially recorded disappearance happened in 2017. A paranormal researcher left his group and went alone to the 5th floor, leaving behind an audio note. "I have to face her myself." The hallway camera recorded him walking into room 502, standing silently before the window, then turning his head to look back. The signal cut out completely after that. No body was ever found, no clues. Only a strange smear on the floor, over 3 meters long, trailing straight toward the window. Today, Waverly Hills is open to night tours, and hundreds of visitors pass through its doors every year. But very few ever return a second time. Some fall into unexplained depression, others develop long-term insomnia. Many report hearing knocking on their doors at 3 a.m., at home, with no one outside. A woman wrote a letter to the organizers after her visit. "I don't know if I brought something home, but my daughter drew a woman in a nurse's uniform standing in her bedroom. She had never seen any photos of the hospital." Waverly Hills doesn't just preserve pain, it absorbs every word left unspoken, every sin that was never forgiven. The walls here are not silent. They whisper, echoing every final breath, every secret, buried beneath layers of dust and time. On a patch of mold-covered wall on the 5th floor, where light has never reached, someone had carved a sentence, not with paint, but with fingernails. "If you turn around, you'll see the last thing I saw." No one knows who wrote it, but since that day, no one has dared walk alone to the end of the hallway. If the door to room 502 creaked open in front of you, would you dare to step inside, knowing full well that what waits inside has never been just an empty room? Weston, West Virginia, 1994. The final night at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. The long, endless halls had already been sealed. Dust clung thick to handrails and door frames. Only Ward D, the wing once used to confine those deemed no longer human, remained unchecked. Daniel Lang, the last night guard on duty, moved quietly through the ink-thick darkness. His flashlight flickered, casting a pale, ghostly light across the damp stone walls. The air was dense, soaked in the scent of old medicine and dried blood. Daniel stopped. His light swept to the end of the hallway. A figure stood there, motionless, facing away. A tattered patient gown exposed pale, blood-streaked skin. Long, soaked hair draped over the head, matted like it had just been pulled from a basin. He called out. No reply. It's still standing there, not breathing, not moving. Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight, stepped forward. The air grew colder with each step. His heart hammered. When he was less than 10 feet away, the figure slowly dissolved, like mist being sucked into a crack in the wall. No sound, no movement, only a faint trail of warm moisture left on the floor, and a long strand of black hair, nearly the length of his arm, stuck to his boot, as if someone had been standing there, truly standing there just seconds ago. Trans-Allegheny began with the promise of healing, a quiet place nestled in the hills of West Virginia, where light and air were believed to restore broken minds. But that promise was soon suffocated by the horrors that followed. Originally designed for 250 patients, by the 1950s, the asylum held over 2,400 souls, a sea of forgotten people, crammed into rotting rooms like packed meat. The entire hospital became an ecosystem of despair, screams, moans, the dull thud of heads banging against walls, just to be noticed. Patients slept on cold floors, soaked in their own urine. Some lost their minds after being tied at the wrists and ankles for 8 consecutive years, never once unshackled. Their names were erased from records. They were no longer considered human. In that darkest period, Dr. Walter Freeman, a man who saw himself as a liberator of minds, moved from room to room with a hand-cracked ice pick and a rusty hammer. No anesthesia, no sterilization, lobotomy, brain cutting, performed like gutting poultry. The compliant ones stayed silent while their brains were carved. The others were pinned down by 4 men and drugged into silence afterward. One female patient began laughing after her operation, not from joy, but because the nerves that controlled her emotions had been destroyed. She laughed for 3 days straight and died with a crooked smile frozen on her stiffened face. Another gouged out her own eyes with a metal spoon. No one stopped her in time. Blood sprayed across the white walls like a final message from a soul denied its right to leave. Behind the maintenance room on the 4th floor was a nameless hallway. It appeared on no official blueprints, no emergency exit, no lights, just a long, suffocating corridor. The walls on both sides were blistered and peeling, like the burned skin of a chemical victim, rough and freezing to the touch. People called it the reverse mirror, not because it had glass, but because anyone who walked into it would see themselves, but not quite themselves. A distorted double, sunken black eyes, lips barely moving as if whispering a name, your name. A weekend nurse once quit her job after telling this. I turned on the light and saw myself at the end of the hallway. But that shadow, it didn't blink. Its lips were moving. I couldn't hear what it said, but I knew. It was speaking my name, soft as a whisper, but every syllable felt like it was drilling into bone. One time, a security camera accidentally recorded a faint white figure, no legs, gliding down the hallway in utter silence. When maintenance came to retrieve the footage, it was gone. But on the glass panel at the corridor's entrance, a tiny handprint remained, cold and wet, as if touched from the other side. A group of university students once entered to film a class project. They never released the footage. One of them suffered insomnia for 18 months, waking up in terror from scratching sounds on the mirror from the inside. Another became reclusive, sealing windows shut and covering every reflective surface with black tape. He said, "There's something out there, and it's learning how to mimic me." In 2007, Sam Hughes, an independent paranormal investigator, arrived at Trans-Allegheny with 3 colleagues to film a night documentary. They brought infrared cameras, directional mics, motion sensors, but none of them were prepared for the thing that was already waiting. When they reached the 3rd floor, Sam veered into a side corridor leading to room 312, once the main lobotomy suite. He broke off from the group, carrying his own mic. What the audio captured has never been forgotten. "She's waiting for me," Sam whispered. "I see her. She doesn't have a face." Then a sharp scraping sound, fast, jagged, like human nails dragging across concrete. Then a scream, shrill, tearing through the mic like a siren from the void. Then silence. Total. When the team returned to room 312, they found Sam sitting on the floor. His body was curled up like it had frozen mid-panic. His eyes were wide open, pupils twitching violently. His hands were covered in scratches, fingernails broken to the root. He didn't blink. He didn't move. "She's still there," he whispered, as if speaking to someone staring back through the wall. "She's still watching, through the glass, waiting for the next." All the cameras malfunctioned. The only surviving audio clip contained a single voice. A hoarse female whisper right against the mic. "Stay." Since then, Sam vanished from every project, every conference, every record. His professional profile went cold, as if he had never existed. Several guests on night tours later claimed they saw a tall, thin man, holding a flashlight, standing motionless at the far end of the third-floor corridor, the one nobody ever dared approach. When someone turned to look, the figure disappeared, like it had never been there. Strangest of all, no one could describe his face, even though he stood close enough to hear him breathing. A woman from Boston, who joined the tour in October that year, said, "Every night after that, at exactly 3 a.m., I heard breathing, right next to my ear. It didn't last long, but it was cold and damp." One night, she woke up. The blanket had been pulled off. The bedsheets were icy, like someone had just been lying beside her, and on her stomach, a tiny handprint, long nails, wrinkled fingertips, as if they'd been soaked in water far too long. She never returned to Trans-Allegheny again, but ever since, in every mirror in her house, there has been a faint, smeared mark, exactly the shape of that same little hand. One night, a tour guide suddenly cried out in the middle of the third-floor hallway, startling the entire group. "That's not me standing next to you. I'm at the back of the line." At that moment, a guest had turned around, feeling someone right beside his shoulder. The phone photo he captured showed a man in a brown coat, wearing a baseball cap, standing directly beside him. But the face, pure white, blurry, featureless. No eyes, no mouth, just an empty void. And the figure cast no shadow. The photo was deleted from the phone days later, not by the owner. When they tried to restore it using software, only a black screen appeared, with one phrase in the bottom corner, "Look back." Trans-Allegheny is not just a derelict ruin. It is a tear, left unstitched, between two worlds, where time folds and pain refuses to be buried. But the most chilling part of all, no official legal records have ever confirmed the existence of anyone named Sam Hughes or Daniel Lang. Did they ever truly exist? Or were they born of something else, a place that remembers better than we do? October 26th, 2012. Autumn winds howled through the ancient woods of Pennsylvania, rustling the dry branches as if warning that something was about to happen. 3:03 a.m., a sacred hour known among occultists as the Devil's Hour. A group of 5, a paranormal detective, a cameraman, and an EVP specialist, entered Pennhurst Asylum, a crumbling structure buried in fog, like a ghost suspended in time. They came fully equipped: infrared cameras, EMF meters, hypersensitive microphones, and even a hand-drawn map of the asylum's hallway system. Their footsteps echoed in the icy silence, each sound bursting forth like it had come from the belly of a stone tomb. Just 20 minutes in, as they reached the second floor, the ward for violent patients, a scream tore through the darkness. A woman in the group broke into sobs. The cameraman beside her clutched her hand, his eyes glassy with shock. No one spoke, but all of them turned toward the end of the hallway, where room 3 sat still, shrouded in pitch black. In a breathless instant, a figure crawled past the broken glass window. It didn't walk, it slithered, it didn't stand. It dragged itself using elbows and knees. The entire body looked torn and stitched together, but the face had no eyes. Just a sunken void, as if eaten away by rot and insects. Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. Drool dripped from its jawline, splattering onto the floor, then vanished as if it had never existed. They reviewed the footage. No one could speak. Even the most seasoned investigators of the paranormal exchanged only silent glances, until one of them vomited blood, trembling. That footage was never made public, but those who've seen it whisper of the entity by a single, bone-chilling name in the world of spiritual investigation: the crawling shadow of Pennhurst. It is the aftermath of 70 years of screams left unheard and of children never once treated as human. Pennhurst was inaugurated in 1908 under a noble name, Pennsylvania State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic, a place where the state promised to offer life, education, and treatment for the disadvantaged, children with disabilities, epileptics, the mentally ill. But just a few years later, that humanitarian dream plummeted straight into an abyss. Pennhurst quickly became a legalized holding facility, a machine that crushed both mind and body. Designed to hold 500, but within 2 decades, it was packed with over 1,500 patients, regardless of age, condition, or chance of survival. Children lay naked, curled up on concrete floors cold as tombstone. Adults who could no longer speak were locked in pitch-black rooms, shackled at wrists and ankles, bolted to the walls like wild animals. Dried feces crusted along the corners. Blood stained the bed frames and hardened underfoot. There were no attending doctors, no medicine, no hope. One anonymous doctor later confessed, "We didn't treat them, we stored them, like broken objects." Over its 70-plus years of operation, more than 1,200 patients died in silence. Many were never called by name, no death certificates, no medical files, only blank white headstones, scattered in the woods behind the asylum, graves for souls never acknowledged as human. In 1968, on a foggy, rain-soaked night, a team of reporters secretly infiltrated Pennhurst with hidden cameras. What they captured peeled away the moral paint that had coated the facility for decades. The documentary, titled "Suffer the Little Children," quickly spread across America. In the trembling footage, audiences saw children strapped to beds with leather restraints, their mouths stuffed with dirty rags to muffle screams. Elderly patients, naked and shaking, lay curled in puddles of their own urine, eyes blank as if long gone. Screams echoed through the halls like fractures in reality, endless, unanswered. The nation erupted in outrage. The images forced the public to stare directly into a horror they had long ignored. Pennhurst wasn't a hospital. It was a factory for erasing humanity. In 1977, the historic lawsuit, Halderman versus Pennhurst, began. It dragged on for years, ending with a ruling that declared the hospital had committed grave violations of human rights. By December 1987, Pennhurst was officially shut down, but the walls had already absorbed too many screams for any court to cleanse, and from the moment the last door closed, something inside began to awaken. After Pennhurst was shut down, it did not fade into oblivion. Instead, it seemed to start breathing. In the rotting darkness, something remained alive and waiting. Since the early 2000s, waves of ghost hunters, documentary filmmakers, and thrill-seeking tourists have poured in. They came out of curiosity, but left in silence, shaken to their core. Paranormal events continued, without pattern, without warning. Shrill, needle-like laughter pierced the air from empty rooms once used to hold children. An old woman in a white hospital gown with hollow eyes appeared for a moment in the hallway, then vanished behind a shattered pane of glass. A 100-kilogram iron door creaked open, then slammed shut, as if someone was still patrolling the corridors. One night, guard quit after just 3 shifts. He claimed that every night he heard whispers directly behind him, but when he turned, there was nothing. Only the overpowering stench of disinfectant seeping from the cracked walls, reeking like long-decayed corpses. Pennhurst is not simply abandoned. It is a sentient thing, a living memory, and it remembers every single name that was left behind. In 2010, the renowned group Ghost Adventures returned to Pennhurst on a night thick with darkness. Infrared scanners and EMF meters quickly detected strange readings in Building C, particularly Room 3, which had remained sealed for decades. When they set up an EVP recorder, a device designed to capture sound beyond human hearing, they didn't expect anything, until a broken, fragile voice echoed from the speaker. "Don't leave me. I'm still alive." The team fell into silence. No one dared speak. Only the sound of the heart rate monitor could be heard, pulsing like a warning. According to decaying records found in storage, Room 3 once held a 9-year-old boy, blind, paralyzed, nonverbal, labeled as uneducable. He had been left there alone for 3 years. No one cared. No one checked. When they finally found him, he was skin draped over bones, his legs gnawed down to the bone by rats, lying beside a trail of dried black blood. When the hospital was closed, several doctors and nurses were brought forward. One elderly nurse named Marie, when asked about the basement, simply said, "We were forbidden. to speak of it. Leaked internal documents revealed the basement had been used for behavioral experiments, electrodes implanted into the brain, shock treatments repeated 30 times per hour, injections of unknown chemicals. One special room beneath the basement had no exit. Those taken there were never seen again. Today, Pennhurst welcomes guests under the label of a haunted attraction. But inside, the walls still whisper. The darkness still watches. There are sounds that do not belong to this world. Something still crawls along the corridors. And in one infamous recording, a voice repeats over and over, "I am America's mistake." Pennhurst no longer heals. It devours souls, one by one.